Hook 015s. Imagine coming into work on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, same desk, same job, and realizing that the person sitting 3 feet away from you has been making $40,000 more than you for the last 4 years. Same title, same responsibilities, same performance reviews. $40,000. Tension 15 to 60s. That's not a hypothetical. That happened. It's been happening. And now, thanks to a wave of new pay transparency laws rolling across the country, it's about to happen everywhere. And here's what nobody is prepared for. It's not just about the money. It never was. Because the moment you find out what someone else earns, something in your brain quietly, permanently shifts. Your entire relationship with your job, your manager, your sense of fairness, your identity at work. It all reorganizes around that number. And the company? The company knew this would happen. That's exactly why they kept it secret for so long. Body. Let's go back to the beginning. For most of modern corporate history, talking about your salary at work was treated almost like a social crime. You just didn't do it. It was considered rude, inappropriate, somehow aggressive. You were taught from your very first job to keep that number private. But here's the thing. That norm wasn't created to protect you. It was created to protect them. When you don't know what your coworkers earn, you have no reference point. You can't negotiate effectively. You can't identify discrimination. You can't even tell if you're being exploited because you have nothing to compare yourself to. And that information asymmetry, that deliberate gap between what employees know and what HR knows, is one of the most powerful wage suppression tools ever invented, and it worked brilliantly for decades. Now the walls are coming down. Colorado started it in 2021. New York followed. Illinois, Washington, California, Minnesota. One by one, states began requiring employers to post salary ranges in job listings. Some went further, requiring full internal pay transparency within the company itself. And what happened when the numbers went public? Chaos. Beautiful, uncomfortable, necessary chaos. In one widely reported case, a company was legally required to post its internal salary bands after a new transparency law took effect. Within 2 weeks, employees across the entire organization had cross-referenced their titles, their tenure, their performance scores, and the math didn't add up. People who had been rated as top performers for years discovered they were earning $15,000, $20,000, sometimes $40,000 less than newer hires in the same role. People who had stayed loyal, who had turned down outside offers, who had believed that if they just kept their heads down and did good work, they would be taken care of. They weren't. And here's the psychology that makes this so devastating. There's a concept in behavioral economics called relative deprivation. It's the idea that how we feel about what we have depends almost entirely on what we think others around us have. Humans are not wired to evaluate their lives in absolute terms. We compare, constantly, automatically, without even choosing to. This is why a person earning $100,000 a year can feel rich in one zip code and invisible in another. The number itself almost doesn't matter. The comparison is what creates the feeling. So when salary transparency hits a workplace, when the comparisons that were always lurking in the background suddenly become concrete and visible, the psychological fallout isn't just disappointment, it's identity disruption. Because here's what most people don't understand about their salary. For a lot of us, our compensation isn't just a number. It's a story we tell ourselves about our worth, about how valued we are, about whether the sacrifices we've made, the late nights, the skipped vacations, the loyalty during hard times, meant something. And pay transparency doesn't just reveal what you're earning. It reveals what someone decided you were worth. And then it shows you what they decided about someone else. Now, hold on, because this is where it gets more complicated. Not everyone who discovers pay gaps is earning less. Some people discover they're at the top of the band, and you'd think that would feel good, right? validation, confirmation that you made it. But researchers studying transparency in Swedish tax records, which have been publicly accessible for decades, found something unexpected. Even high earners in transparent systems reported decreased job satisfaction after learning what their peers made. Not because they earned less, but because the mystery was gone. The meaning they had constructed around their salary collapsed once they could see the full picture. Pay, in other words, doesn't just function as compensation. It functions as a symbol. And symbols lose power the moment they become legible to everyone. So the company kept your salary secret partly to stop you from being angry, but also partly to let you keep believing something that wasn't entirely true. Here's the part nobody talks about. The companies most terrified of pay transparency aren't the ones exploiting workers. Some of them are, but others are just messy. Decades of inconsistent hiring decisions, rushed offers, negotiation dynamics, manager favoritism, market rate adjustments that applied to new hires but never got passed back to existing ones. The result isn't always a conspiracy. Sometimes it's just accumulated negligence. But from the employee's perspective, it doesn't feel any different. Being underpaid by accident feels exactly like being underpaid on purpose. And that's the thing about trust in the workplace. It doesn't survive on intentions. It survives on evidence. And right now, transparency is flooding the zone with evidence that a lot of organizations have a lot to answer for. Climax. Here is the real psychological shift happening right now, and it's bigger than most people realize. For generations, the employment relationship was held together by ambiguity. Workers accepted less than they might have deserved because they didn't know what they deserved. They stayed loyal to companies that might not have deserved their loyalty because they couldn't see the alternative clearly. Pay transparency is not just a policy change. It is a consciousness shift. Once you know what your coworker makes, you cannot unknow it. Once you can see the architecture of how your company values people, you start seeing everything differently. The performance review, the promotion timeline, the all-hands meeting where the CEO talks about being a family. It all looks different when you can see the numbers underneath it. And that is genuinely threatening to the systems that have governed corporate life for the last 50 years. Because informed workers are different workers. They negotiate differently. They leave differently. They organize differently. The whole posture of the employee who doesn't quite know their value, who stays a little uncertain, a little grateful just to have the job. That posture becomes very hard to maintain when the curtain gets pulled back. Ending. Here's where we land. Pay transparency laws were sold as an anti-discrimination tool. And they are. But they're also, quietly, one of the most significant power transfers in the history of work. Not dramatic, not revolutionary in the visible sense, but structural. Slow, real. The companies that will survive this shift are the ones willing to look at what the numbers reveal and actually fix it. Not with spin, not with town halls, with money, with fairness, with the willingness to say we were doing this wrong, and here is how we're changing it. The companies that won't survive it are the ones still hoping nobody compares notes. And for you, watching this right now, if you've never looked up what your role pays in a state with transparency laws, or asked a trusted colleague directly, or used one of the many tools that now exist to benchmark your compensation, maybe it's time to find out what your number actually means.